The wolf was at the edge of the tree line when they found it. Holt Granger found it first. He was out early checking the fence line on the north side of his property, which backed up against the forest, and he saw the shape of it in the gray morning light. Before he understood what it was, he stood at the fence and looked at it for a moment, and then went back for his rifle and came back with 3 other men who had been in earshot. When he'd called out by the time the 4 of them stood at the tree line, there were 6, and by the time 10 minutes had passed, there were 11, which was how quickly a town of Harlan's size mobilized when something like this presented itself on a cold morning, with nothing else requiring attention. The wolf was larger than the ones they occasionally saw at distance, moving through the upper country in winter, a male, gray across the shoulders and darker down the back, with the lean, particular look of an animal that had been ranging hard country in a hard season. It was lying on its side with the specific stillness of something that has stopped fighting the situation it's in and is waiting for whatever comes next. Its right foreleg was wrong, not a clean break, something worse than that, a wound from something that had been at it, a trap, or a fall, or another animal, the flesh torn and the bone visible in a way that made several of the men look away. It had been bleeding. The snow round it was marked with the dark record of how far it had dragged itself and how recently the dragging had stopped. It was alive, barely, in the specific way of a creature that has come to the end of what it had and is on the other side of that ending, where there is very little left. Its eyes were open, yellow, the way wolf eyes are yellow, not worn, cold, just present. The particular quality of an animal intelligence that has no overlay of sentiment or strategy, just the direct apprehension of what is. It looked at the men standing at the fence. Tom Aldridge, who was the closest thing Harlan had to a sheriff, since the actual sheriff had gone to Tucson for the winter and not come back, said, "Best to put it down. Suffering's no good for any creature." There was general agreement. He raised the rifle. "Hold on." The voice came from behind the group. They turned. Cade Marlowe was standing at the back of the gathered men. He had come from the direction of the main street, which meant he'd been in town rather than at his place outside it, which was unusual enough to note. He was 40 years old, lean, with the weathered quality of someone who had spent most of his life outdoors, and had the face to prove it. He was known in Harlan the way certain men are known: present, capable, unremarkable to look at and difficult to disregard. He was looking at the wolf. "Marlowe," Aldridge said. "Animals suffering. Better to all take it." Cade said. Silence. Several of the men looked at each other with the specific look of people determining whether they had heard correctly. "Take it," Aldridge said. "Onto my horse," Cade said. "Back to my place." "Marlowe," Holt Granger said, with the patient tone of a man explaining something obvious. "It's a wolf." "I know what it is," Cade said. "It'll be dead by noon, regardless," Aldridge said. "Legs too far gone, maybe," Cade said. He had already moved past the group and was at the fence, climbing over it with the easy efficiency of someone who has climbed enough fences that the motion is unconscious. He crouched beside the wolf. The wolf looked at him. He looked back. He took off his coat. The men at the fence watched as Cade Marlowe wrapped a dying wolf in his coat with the careful, methodical attention of someone doing something they have thought through, rather than something impulsive. Lifted the animal, and it was heavy, 80 pounds at least, and the lifting was not nothing, and carried it back through the fence to where his horse was tied. The horse shifted. "Easy," he said, to the horse. Then something lower, to the wolf. Words nobody could hear. He got it across the horse's withers, mounted, settled the animal against him. He looked at the group of men at the fence. They looked at him. Nobody said anything for a moment. "Gone soft, Marlowe," someone said. From the back. No name attached to it. The voice of communal opinion rather than individual accountability. Cade looked at them for a moment. "Maybe," he said. He rode. The town of Harlan watched him go with the expression of a community that has just witnessed something. It does not know what to do with, not angry, not afraid, just uncertain in the way that certain actions produce uncertainty in people who had thought they knew the person who performed them. He's lost his mind. Holt Granger said finally. Nobody disagreed. His place was for miles outside Harlan, in the hill country, where the land changed character from the flat pragmatism of the valley to something more personal and difficult. He had built it himself. Over 3 years, which was visible in the way it had been built, not according to a plan so much as according to what each stage of building taught him, which meant it was imperfect in specific ways that a professional would have avoided, and solid in ways that only sustained personal attention produces. He had been told, when he first staked the claim, that the hill country was too remote, too hard to reach in winter, too far from the commerce and community that made frontier life viable. He had heard this and had built there anyway. Because the remoteness was not a drawback in his accounting, but a feature, he had not always wanted to be remote. The before-remote Cade Marlowe was not something he revisited often, but it was available to him in the way that the significant periods of a life are always available, present in the background, informing the present without dominating it. A marriage, in his 20s, to a woman named Clara, who had died of fever in the 3rd year, a business partnership in his 30s, in a cattle operation that had prospered, and then been taken from him through a legal mechanism that had been technically lawful and thoroughly dishonest. A period after the taking, during which he had been, in the assessment of the 2 towns he had lived in during that period, a problem not criminal, not violent, but angry in the specific way of a man who has been wronged by systems he had believed in and has not yet found a relationship with that wrong that allows him to function. He had been judged during that period. He had been categorized and avoided and talked about and understood in the shorthand of people who prefer simple stories about complex situations. He had found the hill country. After that, he understood. As a result of what he had been through, certain things about the experience of being regarded with suspicion by a community that has decided what you are without sufficient information. He understood it not abstractly, but in the specific, bodily way of someone who has stood in the middle of a street and felt the withdrawal of regard from the people around him. He understood what it meant to be hunted by other people's ideas of you. He laid the wolf on the table. It was still alive. Barely. The breathing shallow and the yellow eyes open to the minimum that consciousness required. He lit the lamp and looked at the leg properly for the first time, in adequate light, with the specific attention of a man assessing what could be done. It was bad. He had dealt with injured animals before, the ordinary injuries of ranch work, horses and cattle, and once a dog that had gotten into something it shouldn't have, and he had a sense of what the frontier of survivability looked like. This was at the edge of it. The wound was infected, the infection was advanced, and the blood loss had been significant. He cleaned the wound. He did this carefully and thoroughly, and without haste, because haste in these situations is the enemy of the outcome you're trying to produce. The wolf was too weak to resist, and did not resist. Its yellow eyes watched him with the focused, unblinking attention of an animal trying to determine the nature of what was happening to it. He had no veterinary knowledge beyond the practical. He had antiseptic, because he kept it for himself, and it served the same purpose in animals. And he had clean cloth, and he had the capacity to set a bone if the bone needed setting, which it did. Which was the part of the process that cost them both something. The wolf made a sound that was not a howl, but was the concentrated version of one compressed by weakness into something that was almost quiet and was not quiet at all. I know, Cade said. He finished. He moved the wolf to the corner near the stove, where the warmth was consistent, and made a bed of the cleanest thing he had, and settled the animal into it. The yellow eyes found him. He sat on the floor beside it for a while. Outside, the winter morning was doing its work, the cold pressing against the cabin walls with the indifference of weather that has an agenda and a schedule and no interest in the particulars of what's inside. You can die if you want to, Cade said, not callously, with the honesty of a man who understands that certain outcomes are not in his control and that the acknowledgement of this is not defeat. Or you can do the other thing. Either way, you're warm tonight. The yellow eyes held. He went to make coffee. The wolf did not die. This surprised Cade less than it might have surprised someone who hadn't looked into its eyes on the first morning and seen the specific quality that was in them. Not the will to live. Exactly, which was too abstract a phrase for what he'd seen. But something more immediate than that. The animal intention to continue. The next breath. And then the next. Pursued not as a goal, but as the natural consequence of a body that had not yet been given sufficient reason to stop. By the third day, the fever had broken. He'd known it was there by the heat of the animal, and had known when it broke by the change in the quality of the breathing. By the fifth day, the wolf was eating not enthusiastically, but eating, which was the relevant fact. By the 10th day, it was sitting up. He changed the dressing on the leg every day. This was the negotiation of the recovery, the part that required the wolf's cooperation, which it gave with the reluctant and then less reluctant submission that he tracked as progress. By the second week, it allowed the handling without the preliminary tension. That meant it was deciding whether to object. He did not name it. This was a deliberate decision, arrived at on the third day, when he noticed himself about to use a name, and stopped himself. He had learned the cost of naming things. He would care for the animal, and he would do it well, and he would not name it. And when it was able to go, it would go, and that was the shape of the arrangement. He called it Wolf, which was not a name but a category, and which maintained the necessary distance. Wolf did not maintain distance. This was the thing that confounded his expectations most thoroughly. He had assumed that a wild animal, however, dependent in its recovery, would maintain the fundamental wildness that expressed itself as distance. As the preserved space between itself and the human, it was tolerating. Wolf did not preserve this space. As the recovery progressed and the weakness retreated, the animal moved toward him rather than away, choosing proximity with the consistency that seemed to reflect preference rather than accident. It slept near the stove. When he was at the stove, it was near him. When he moved to the other side of the cabin, it tracked the movement and eventually relocated. He was aware of this. Without knowing what to do with it, he told himself. It was dependent behavior. The animal, associating him with food and warmth and the absence of pain, reorienting toward him the way an injured animal orients toward its source of care. This was probably partly true. He also looked into the yellow eyes sometimes and thought that it was probably not entirely true. He went to town after 3 weeks. He went because he needed supplies and because the road was passable and because he had been avoiding it, and avoidance of things he was avoiding was not, in his experience, a sustainable strategy. The town of Harlan received him with the specific quality of attention that communities give to people who have done something that the community doesn't know what to do with. Not hostile. Nobody was hostile to Cade Marlowe, who had been in Harlan for 4 years, and had a functional if not warm relationship with most of its inhabitants. But altered. The conversations were slightly different in their quality, questions slightly more present in the spaces between sentences. Holt Granger stopped him outside the general store. "How's the wolf?" he said. "Recovering," Cade said. Granger looked at him. "What do you intend to do with it?" he said. "Nothing," Cade said. "It'll go when it can go, and if it doesn't go," Granger said, "then it doesn't go," Cade said. Granger looked at him with the expression of a man who wants to say something and is deciding whether to say it. "There's talk," he said. "People are concerned. A wolf that's been with a man, that's not afraid of people. That's more dangerous than a wild one. People are saying it ought to be dealt with." "People," Cade said. "It's a fair concern," Granger said. Cade looked at him. "It's a recovering animal in a cabin 4 miles outside town," he said. "It's not concerned with Harlan. Harlan might extend the same courtesy." He went into the general store. He got his supplies. He rode back to the hill country. And when he arrived, Wolf was at the door of the cabin, the leg still not fully bearing weight, but upright, which was different from the first week in the way that mattered. He looked at the animal. The animal looked at him. "Town thinks you're dangerous," he said. Wolf regarded him with the yellow eyes. "I told them you were recovering," he said. They weren't satisfied. He went inside. Wolf followed. 6 weeks after Cade had carried a dying wolf out of the tree line and across a fence in front of 11 bewildered men, Wolf walked under his own power to the edge of the cabin clearing and stood looking at the forest with the specific attention of an animal that has spent weeks being inside and is re-establishing its relationship with outside. Cade watched from the porch. He thought, "This is it. This is the going." Wolf stood at the edge of the clearing for a long time. Then, he turned and came back. He sat near the porch steps and looked at Cade with the yellow eyes. Cade looked back. "All right," he said. The arrangement continued. Wolf ranged during the days, sometimes gone for hours, the range extending as the leg healed and the condition improved, returning by evening with the consistency of an animal that has a place to return to and returns to it. In the mornings he was there. In the evenings he was there. The middle of the days were his. The leg healed completely in the 8th week. Not perfectly. There would always be a slight favoring, the ghost of the injury in the gait, but functionally, fully. The wolf that moved through the clearing in the 8th week was not the dying animal from the tree line. He was something else. Large, capable, with the particular quality of wildness restored. To him, that injury had temporarily suspended. He was wild, and he came back every evening. Cade stopped thinking about the contradiction and let it be what it was. On a Tuesday morning in the 9th week, they were riding. Cade had begun taking Wolf on the longer rides, not leashed or controlled in any way, simply present, moving through the hill country alongside the horse with the fluid economy of an animal that knows this terrain and knows it well. They were on the upper trail, which ran along the ridge above the valley and offered long sight lines in both directions. When Wolf stopped, not the gradual slowing of an animal that has found something interesting, the immediate, complete stop of an animal that has received a signal and is processing it, every sense engaged, the body absolutely still, the head oriented in a direction that was off the trail, downslope, into the dense brush that covered the middle section of the hill. Cade stopped the horse. He had been around Wolf long enough to understand the difference between his behaviors, had learned to read them the way you learn to read the behaviors of any animal you spend sustained time with. This was not curiosity and not play, and not the ordinary interest of a predator tracking prey. This was something else. Wolf moved off the trail, downslope into the brush. He looked back at Cade. Cade dismounted, tied the horse, and followed. They moved through the brush for perhaps a quarter mile, Wolf setting a pace that was deliberate and quiet, the conscious quiet of an animal that understands that quiet is currently required before stopping at the edge of a clearing on the lower slope. Cade came up beside him and looked. 6 horses, tied in the trees at the far side of the clearing, not the horses of hunters or travelers, too many, too deliberately concealed, tied in a way that kept them quiet and minimized their visibility from the trail above. Beside the horses, 3 men, a 4th, slightly apart, on one knee, looking at something on the ground that Cade understood, as he brought his eye to it, was a map or a drawing of some kind. He could not hear words, but he could hear the cadence of planning, the back and forth of men who are coordinating something with specific timing. He counted horses again. 6 horses. 4 men visible, 2 more somewhere. He looked at the men with the specific attention of someone who has, in a previous life, done the work of identifying and categorizing threat. He recognized one of them, not by name, by type. The man on one knee with the map had a quality that Cade had seen before, in the years when seeing it was part of his work. A specific organization of the face and body. That meant a man who has done this before, who is good at it, who is not nervous because nervous is not in his operating range. He looked at the drawing on the ground. From his angle and distance, he could not be certain. But the shape of it, the arrangement of lines, the central feature that was angular in the way of a building on a main street, looked like a town. A specific town. He backed away from the clearing. Wolf came with him. Silent. He got back to the horse. He thought about the distance to Harlan, and the number of men and the arrangement. of horses and the quality of the man with the map. He mounted. "Let's go," he said. Wolf was already moving. He rode hard. The trail from the ridge to the valley was not built for speed, and he pushed it as fast as the horse could reasonably manage, which was faster than comfortable and slower than urgency wanted. Wolf kept pace, which told him something about the animal's fully recovered condition. Because keeping pace with the horse on a downhill trail was not nothing, he arrived in Harlan in the early afternoon. Tom Aldridge was outside the jail, the building that served as the jail and the office of whoever was currently acting as law in Harlan, which was Aldridge by default, and had been since the previous autumn. Cade pulled up. 6 horses, he said. 4 men visible, 2 more somewhere. Upper trail, north slope, planning position. One of them has a map of a main street. Aldridge looked at him. Planning position, Aldridge said. They're going to move tonight, Cade said. The light's wrong for the afternoon, and tomorrow they risk someone finding their camp. Aldridge looked at the street around him. The ordinary Tuesday afternoon of a small frontier town. People going about things. The commerce and conversation of a community that had no current awareness of the specific problem on the north slope. He looked at Wolf, who had stopped at Cade's horse's shoulder, and was sitting with the particular composed alertness of an animal that is waiting for what comes next. The wolf led you to them, Aldridge said. Yes. Cade said. Aldridge processed this. How many men can we put together? Cade said. Who can be trusted to hold a position and not do something that makes things worse? 6. Maybe 8, Aldridge said. Give me an hour. You have less than that. Cade said. Aldridge went. What followed was the specific urgency of a small community receiving information it wasn't prepared for and attempting to organize a response in a compressed time frame. Cade spoke to men individually rather than to a group, because groups in these situations produce discussion where individuals produce decisions. And he needed decisions. He told each man the same things: what he'd seen, where, the number, the timing. He told them what position he wanted them to hold and what he needed them to do, which in most cases was be visible in a specific place at a specific time and wait for instruction. He was in the middle of this talking to Ed Calloway outside the stable when Holt Granger appeared. Granger looked at Wolf, who was sitting near the horse with the steady watchfulness that was his resting state. Is it true? Granger said. The wolf found them? Yes, Cade said. Granger was quiet for a moment. I'll take a position, he said. Tell me where, Cade told him. There was a moment, near the end of the preparation, when a woman named Agnes Pierce, who ran the boarding house, and had opinions about most things, and was usually not wrong, came out of her establishment and looked at the unusual activity on the main street, and looked at Wolf, and looked at Cade. Is it as bad as it looks? She said. It's manageable, Cade said. If people do what they're told, what should I do? She said. Get the children off the street, he said, and stay inside. Both things. She went back inside immediately, which was why Agnes Pierce was someone Cade respected. He looked at Wolf. Wolf looked at him. You should go, Cade said. Meaning that the coming confrontation was not a situation for an animal, however recovered, however capable. Go to the hill. Come back tomorrow. Wolf looked at him with the yellow eyes. He did not go. Cade exhaled. All right, he said. He checked his rifle. He looked at the position of the sun. He took his position. They came at dusk, 4 of them on the main street, 2 more at the back, the split that Cade had predicted and had positioned men to address. They came with the confidence of men who have planned something and believe the planning is sufficient, which is the specific confidence that planning produces in men who have not adequately accounted for the variable of someone having planned against them. The main street of Harlan was not empty. It was not full. Cade had not wanted it full, had in fact spent an hour ensuring it was not full, because full meant civilians in positions where they would become problems. But it was not empty either. Aldridge was visible. 2 men Cade trusted were visible. Cade himself was visible on the main street, in the specific position he had chosen. The leader of the group, the man from the clearing. The one who had been on one knee with the map pulled his horse up when he saw the street. He looked at it. He looked at the people on it. He was doing the same calculation Cade had done on the north slope. The rapid assessment of whether the situation was what he'd expected, and the rapid conclusion that it was not. He had not finished his calculation when Wolf moved from the alley beside the stable where he had been, where Cade had not told him to be, but where he had positioned himself with the independent judgment of an animal that was not following orders. Wolf came into the street at the speed of an animal that has covered distance in open country and is fully capable of covering more. He went for the horses, not for the men, for the horses, which was the tactically sound decision, because the horses of men who are preparing to do something specific are the linchpin of that preparation. He moved through the group of horses with the particular combination of focused intent and contained aggression that he had been born with, and that no amount of recovery in a cabin had diminished. And the horses responded the way horses respond to a wolf, at close range. The resulting chaos bought 30 seconds. 30 seconds was sufficient. Aldridge and the men with him moved to the back of the buildings. The two men who had come around the rear encountered a situation that was not what they'd expected. Holt Granger and Ed Calloway and a third man who had decided tonight was the night he was going to be useful. The confrontation lasted perhaps 4 minutes. 4 minutes is a long time in that kind of situation, and a short time in retrospect. When it was done, 5 of the 6 were contained, 2 who had been convinced to make the sensible decision when the arithmetic became clear, 3 who had been less quickly convinced, but had arrived at the same place. The 6th was the leader, who had made a different decision, and had found that Cade Marlowe was positioned for exactly that decision. He was alive. He would face proper law, the real kind, which was coming from the county seat in the morning at Aldridge's wire. Cade stood in the main street in the aftermath, and looked at the situation. Wolf came back. He came from the far end of the street, where he had run the last of the spooked horses to the edge of town, and then stopped because the edge of town was sufficient. He walked back along the main street of Harlan, with the unhurried quality of an animal that has done what was required and is now doing something else. The people of Harlan who had come out of their buildings into the aftermath watched him walk the main street. The children who had come to windows and doors watched him. He did not hurry. He found Cade and sat beside him with the composed, yellow-eyed attention of his resting state. Agnes Pierce came out of the boarding house. She looked at Wolf for a long moment. She looked at Cade. "I was wrong about the animal," she said. "Most people were." Cade said. "I include myself in most people," she said. "I'm telling you I was wrong." He nodded. She went back inside. Holt Granger came to stand beside Cade in the street. He looked at Wolf. He looked at the street. "I was wrong too," he said. "I know," Cade said. "I'm saying it." Granger said. "I know," Cade said. "Thank you." They stood in the aftermath of a Tuesday evening in Harlan and watched the town come back to itself. The days after had a quality that Cade had not anticipated. He had anticipated the relief that was predictable, the specific feeling of a community that has faced something and come through it. He had anticipated the practical business of the aftermath, the county law arriving, the handling of the contained men, the various administrative consequences of what had happened. He had not anticipated what the town did with Wolf. It was Agnes Pierce who started it, which in retrospect made sense. She had said she was wrong, and saying it was not sufficient for Agnes Pierce, who followed words with actions the way she followed receipts with ledgers, methodically and without remainder. She came to his place on the Thursday after, and she brought a cut of meat that was better than what she served her paying guests, and she set it on the porch without comment and went back to town. The following week, it was the Calloway children, Ed Calloway's 2 boys, 9 and 11, who arrived at his gate on a Saturday morning with the permission of their father and the expressed desire to see the wolf. He had let them in because they had asked properly, and their father had sent them properly, and refusing properly asked questions seemed unreasonable. They sat in the clearing for an hour. Wolf regarded them with the yellow eyes from a distance of 20 feet. The 11-year-old, whose name was Marcus, asked questions with the seriousness of a child who treats all information as equally worth having. Does he know he's a wolf? Marcus said. He knows he's himself, Cade said. Whatever that is. Does he know he's a hero? Marcus said. Cade looked at Wolf. I don't think he thinks in those terms, he said. What terms does he think in? Marcus said. Present ones, Cade said. What's here? What's now? What needs doing? Marcus thought about this. That's not a bad way, he said. No, Cade said. It's not. Granger came the weeks following. Not as a visitor exactly, but in the way of a man who finds reasons to be in the direction of someone he has revised his opinion of, which is the friendship of men who don't make friendships easily. He helped with a fence project that needed helping with. He stayed for coffee without being asked and talked about things that were happening in the valley without requiring Cade to contribute more than he wanted to. Wolf tolerated Granger with the graduated assessment of an animal deciding over multiple encounters. What? Something deserves. By the third visit, Granger had been promoted to the category of acceptable, which Wolf communicated by no longer tracking his movements from across the clearing. Granger noted this. I've been approved, he said. So it seems, Cade said. How do you know when he's approved of you? Granger said. He stops watching for reasons not to, Cade said. Granger was quiet for a moment. That's how people work too, he said. Yes, Cade said. It is. Tom Aldridge came on an official visit, the follow-up to the county law's business, the paperwork that needed signatures, the formal accounting of a situation that had been resolved in a specific way. He did the official part efficiently, and then sat on the porch step and looked at Wolf in the clearing. The county sheriff asked about the wolf, he said. In the report. What did you tell him? Cade said. The truth, Aldridge said. That a wolf found an ambush and warned a cowboy, and the cowboy warned the town. How did the county sheriff respond to that? Cade said. He asked me to repeat it, Aldridge said. Then he wrote it down. Cade looked at Wolf. Wolf was watching a bird at the edge of the clearing with the specific, focused attention of a predator who is not currently hunting, but has not turned the capacity off. He's not a symbol, Cade said. He's just himself. I know, Aldridge said. But that's enough for people to make a story out of. People make stories out of everything, Cade said. Yes, Aldridge said. But some stories are worth making. The spring came and Wolf ranged further. This was not a change. The ranging had always extended with the season, the winter months having naturally contracted it, but the spring ranging had a quality that the winter ranging had not had. He was gone for days now, rather than hours, returning with the mud of different country on his paws and the specific smell of distance. Cade did not follow these departures with worry. He had understood, at some point in the months since the tree line morning, what the arrangement was. Had understood it not by deciding what it was, but by observing what it was, which was the honest method. Wolf was not a dog, and not a prisoner, and not a pet. He was something that didn't have a category, or had a category with only one member, which was itself. He came and went. He came back. This was the whole of it, and it was sufficient. In the summer, Wolf disappeared for 3 weeks. Cade noted the absence and did not pursue it. He worked the ranch and went to town when he needed to go, and had the occasional conversation with Granger and with Aldridge and with Agnes Pierce, whose opinion of him had completed its revision and who had settled into a relationship with him that resembled, in its practical warmth and lack of sentimentality, what passed for friendship in people of their respective constitutions. On the 22nd day, he came out in the morning, and Wolf was at the edge of the clearing. Not alone. There was a second wolf, smaller, younger, with the specific quality of an animal that has been raised in the wild, and has the confidence that comes from that, which is different from the confidence of a rehabilitated animal. She sat beside him with the composed attention of a creature who is doing exactly what she has decided to do, and sees no reason to explain it. Cade stood on the porch and looked at them. He looked at Wolf. Wolf looked at him with the yellow eyes. "All right," Cade said. They stayed for 2 days. Then they went. He watched them go from the porch with the specific quality of feeling that he had organized his life to avoid, and that had arrived anyway, through the particular route of a dying animal in a tree line on a cold morning. And that he found, to his ongoing surprise, was not what he'd been afraid of, not loss, not the prelude to loss, something else. The thing that remained when you gave something the freedom to go. And it came back anyway. Not because it had to, but because it wanted to. And then one day didn't come back. Because the shape of its life had taken it elsewhere, as it should. And what remained was not diminished by the going, but was somehow constituted by it. Made real by the fact that it had been freely given and freely received. And was not dependent on a chain. Wolf came back twice more that year. Once in the fall, alone, for a week. A visit that had the quality of a check. An accounting of a place and a person that still registered as worth accounting. Once in the winter, briefly, in the night, he was not there in the morning, but his tracks were in the snow around the cabin in a circuit that suggested he had walked the perimeter, and found it satisfactory. In the spring of the following year, he did not come. Cade waited. Without the waiting being its own suffering, it was simply the orientation toward a possibility that might or might not occur. It did not occur that spring. He thought sometimes, when he was in the upper country, and the sight lines were long, that he saw a shape on a distant ridge, large, gray across the shoulders, darker down the back, standing with the particular composed authority of an animal that knows its territory and its place in it. He couldn't be certain. He told himself it was probably not. He also told himself that it might be, and that the might was sufficient. He rode down from the ridge. He went back to the ranch. He went to Harlan sometimes in the evenings. Now more than he used to. More than he had when the hill country and its remoteness had been the whole of what he wanted. He sat at the bar in the saloon and talked to people with the specific quality of a man who has remembered that talking to people is something he can do and finds it, on balance, worth doing. The town knew the story. Towns always know their stories, and this one had been told in the particular way of things that are true and also larger than their truth. The cowboy who saved the dying wolf. The wolf who found the ambush. The wolf who walked the main street of Harlan, while people came out of their buildings to watch. Children asked him about it. He answered with the patience he'd discovered he had. He told them it was not a remarkable story, really. A hurt animal needed help, and he helped it. The animal, being itself, did what animals do. Paid attention to the world it moved through with the totality that humans rarely managed. But why did you save it? They asked. Always this question. The same question the town had asked from the beginning. He thought about it each time. Because the question deserved a fresh answer rather than a rehearsed one. Because it was suffering, he said. And suffering that can be addressed ought to be addressed. That's the whole of it. But it was a wolf, they said. Everyone was afraid of it. Yes, he said. And you weren't? They said. He thought about the yellow eyes at the tree line. About what had been in them. Not the absence of danger, not harmlessness, but something he had recognized. I was, he said. A little. But fear isn't a reason not to do something. It's just information. You take the information, and you decide what to do with it. The children thought about this. What did you decide? They said. That it needed help more than I needed to be unafraid, he said. They nodded at this with the serious satisfaction of children receiving an answer that makes sense to them. He looked out toward the hill country, sometimes, from the main street of Harlan, at the ridge line in the distance. He thought about what was up there. He thought. True freedom doesn't require chains. True connection doesn't require permanence. True strength is not the absence of fear, but the decision made in the presence of it. He had learned these things before, in the before. He had forgotten them in the years of the hill country. A dying wolf in a tree line had reminded him. Sometimes the ones the world fears the most, he thought, are simply waiting for someone to show them mercy. Not because mercy will make them safe. Not because kindness will make them tame, but because every creature that breathes deserves, at minimum, the chance to discover what it is capable of when it is not fighting for its life, The wolf discovered it. So did the cowboy. That is the whole of the story. That is enough. If this cowboy story touched your heart, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to Broken Spur Stories, and turn on notifications for more emotional Western stories filled with hope, redemption, and unforgettable adventures from the Old West. Share this story with someone who believes that compassion can change even the wildest heart. And tell us in the comments, would you have saved the dying wolf? Or would you have walked away like everyone else?